throw me down a flight of stairs, and destroy the only real relationship I've ever cared about. Well, I hope you didn't like your life as you knew it. Before I get into the blood and the cordite, let me give you some context. I'm going to be intentionally vague about certain specifics. If you've ever worked in cybersecurity or for the alphabet agencies, you'll understand the caginess. I graduated high school in the late 2000s. College felt like a waiting room for a life I didn't want, so I enlisted in the Navy. I passed the special warfare training block during basic and aimed for the SEALs. I didn't make it. That pipeline is a meat grinder, and it chewed me up just enough to spit me out into the SWCC, Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewmen. We are the dirty boat guys. If you've seen the movies, we're the heavily armed shadows arriving on fast boats, laying down a wall of suppressive fire so the golden boys can get pulled out of hell. Sometimes we man the hellos. Mostly, we patrolled brown water riverways in the Middle East, baking in the sun, practically begging for someone to take a potshot at us just to break the suffocating monotony. It sounds deeply cinematic, but the reality was a lot of diesel fumes, damp socks, and joint pain. I didn't kick in doors, I didn't breach compounds. On the handful of occasions I actually traded brass with the enemy, it was purely reactive. But I did my time, took a 7.62 round through the meat of my leg, and spent the last 4 years of my 12-year career writing a desk, pivoting hard into cyber operations. Eventually, I retired, collected my VA disability card, knocked out my cybersecurity certifications, and started my own private sector LLC. Life was quiet, until it wasn't. This nightmare actually kicked off back in early 2016, right around the time I was on medical leave for the leg injury. I had moved back to my hometown near a major naval base and reconnected with my high school sweetheart, Briani. We had been best friends growing up. I completely fumbled my chance with her back then, so when the universe handed me a second shot in my early 30s, I didn't hesitate. Briani came as a package deal. She had a 3-year-old daughter named Tamsin. Tamsin's biological father was a ghost, which was entirely his loss because that little girl was absolute magic. Within weeks, we were building pillow forts, and the first time Tamsin looked up at me with those giant, trusting eyes and called me daddy, I swear my ribcage expanded. I was head over heels. I'd been shot at, stabbed, and patched up with superglue and staples, but nothing terrified me more than the sheer vulnerability of being that deeply in love. We were like obnoxious teenagers, tagging each other in memes, texting under the table, stealing moments in the kitchen after Tamsin went to sleep. But every paradise has a snake, and ours came in the form of a lanky, translucent wannabe gangster named Kelton. Kelton was Briani's brother, not by blood. He was just some former tweaker who worked at the big box retail store with her. One afternoon, he had crashed hard from whatever chemical cocktail he was writing, and Briani bought him a cheeseburger and a soda. In the currency of street-level addicts, she had practically given him a kidney. He attached himself to her like a remora eel. They called each other brother and sister, which unfortunately made him Tamsin's uncle. About a month and a half into my relationship with Briani, this feckless waste of oxygen lost his housing and moved onto her futon. Our introduction was intensely memorable. I had stayed the night, Tamsin was asleep between us, and I heard a heavy thump in the living room. Given a recent string of break-ins in her complex, I didn't ask questions. I cleared the bedroom doorway with my 1911 drawn. Kelton found himself staring down the cavernous barrel of a .45 caliber pistol, his hands full of stale cereal. To smooth over the tension of nearly blowing a hole in her pseudo-sibling, I loaned Kelton my spare television and a PS3. I figured if he was glued to a screen, he wouldn't be a nuisance. I was wrong. Kelton treated Briani like his personal maid. He expected her to cook for him after she worked a 9-hour shift. He left his dirty laundry in piles, and once with a completely straight face, asked her to relace his sneakers because she did it better. He was 23 years old, jobless, and functionally useless. I'd walk into the bathroom and find he'd left a grotesque surprise in the toilet without flushing. He smoked cheap weed on the balcony all day, bragging about his past as a successful drug dealer and a professional drift car driver. Yet, he nearly backed my sedan into a concrete light pole 4 separate times. Whenever I pushed back, whenever I told him to clean up his own filth, he'd puff out his sunken chest. He constantly threatened to kick my ass, or if he couldn't do it himself, call his boys to do it for him. Let me reiterate, I was not a SEAL. I didn't go through Bud/S, but my career path still mandated a high level of lethality. I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the fleet. I practiced Kali and Salat with some Filipino operators on base. I spent hundreds of hours running CQB shooting drills, mastering the center-axis relock stance. Even with a throbbing leg and a dependency on painkillers just to stand up straight on rainy days, I could have dismantled Kelton without breaking a sweat. But I loved his sister. I wanted to marry her. I wanted to adopt Tamsin. So I swallowed my pride. I bit my tongue so hard I practically tasted copper. Eventually, the tension boiled over. I was spending so much time at Brianni's that we discussed moving in together. Kelton immediately demanded a spare room in our hypothetical new place. The sheer audacity snapped something in me. One evening, after he caught an attitude, I calmly unplugged my PS3 and my TV, packed them up, and walked out the door. He screamed that I was banned from the apartment. Brianni sharply reminded him whose name was on the lease. A week later, the spark hit the powder keg. I was heading to the naval base early, and Brianni was taking Tamsin to daycare. We were buckling the kid into her car seat when I realized my wallet was still on the nightstand. I jogged back up to the apartment, unlocked the door, and grabbed it. As I turned to leave, Kelton emerged from the hallway. The sink behind him was piled high with a grotesque mountain of mixing bowls and wooden spoons from his 2 a.m. macaroni and cheese binge. "You're cleaning those dishes when you get back," he ordered, his voice dripping with unearned authority. I stopped, I looked at the crusted cheese on the cookware, I looked at his pale, smug face. "You're high," I said, my voice dead calm. "Clean them yourself, bitch, and don't ever tell me what to do again." I executed a crisp about-face and walked out the door, my bad leg aching with every step. I made it exactly 6 steps down the exterior concrete stairwell. Behind me, the front door violently slammed open. Before I could pivot, Kelton's hands hit my shoulder blades. He shoved me hard. I lost my footing, tumbling down the remaining stairs in a chaotic tangle of limbs. I hit the concrete, landing flat on my back, the impact driving the air from my lungs and cracking the back of my skull against the deck. White-hot agony flared in my damaged leg. Before the stars could clear from my vision, Kelton leaped from the top stair, landing directly on top of me. That was his fatal mistake. He knocked the daze right out of my head and replaced it with pure, unadulterated survival instinct. I ignored the screaming pain in my spine. I framed his hips, swept his leg, and reversed our positions in a fraction of a second. I mounted him, pinning his scrawny arms under my knees, and I went to work. I rained absolute hell down on his face. I split his lips against his teeth. I fractured the orbital bone around his left eye. I drove a sharp, calculated strike right into the side of his neck. I was running on pure adrenaline and rage, entirely indifferent to whether he kept breathing. "Stop! Get off him!" Brianni's scream pierced the red fog in my brain. I froze, my knuckles slick with his blood. I stood up, chests heaving. The second I stepped back, Kelton spat a tooth onto the concrete and started weeping. "He threatened to kill me," Kelton wailed, clutching his ruined face. "He attacked me and threw me down the stairs because I asked for the PlayStation back." It was an easily disprovable lie. The neighbor's doorbell camera caught the whole thing. But in that moment, seeing her brother a bloody mess on the pavement, Brianni's protective instincts kicked in. She looked at me like I was a monster. I drove her to work in dead silence. I dropped Tamsin at daycare, my chest hollowing out with every mile. When I got to the base, Commander Vane took one look at my bruised knuckles and the ice pack on my neck and demanded answers. When I refused to press charges, he called me the apex of dumbasses and warned me it would come back to bite me. He was absolutely right. That night, Kelton delivered an ultimatum to Brianni. Either I was gone or he was walking out of her life forever. Because that parasitic loser had been the only constant male figure in Tamsin's short life, Brianni couldn't bear to rip him away from her daughter. I got the axe. Packing up a small cardboard box of Tamsin's toys and Brianni's spare clothes from my apartment was the closest I've ever come to a total emotional collapse. It's one thing to lose a woman. It's an entirely different circle of hell to lose a child you were ready to call your own. I was a ghost of a man. But Kelton wasn't satisfied with just taking my family. He wanted me broken. 2 months later, I walked out to the parking lot to find my sedan sitting on cinder blocks. The wheels were gone. The catalytic converter was sawed off. My windows were smashed, and spray-painted across the hood were crude swastikas and homophobic slurs. The irony of being called a slur after sleeping with his sister for half a year was lost on his idiotic friends. It cost me $2,500 out of pocket. 2 weeks after that, things escalated from petty vandalism to attempted murder. A masked figure hurled a lit Molotov cocktail at my front door in the middle of the night. If my apartment building's sprinkler system hadn't functioned flawlessly, the flames would have trapped me on the 3rd floor. I gave the police Kelton's name, and their subsequent questioning was enough to get him fired from his under-the-table mechanic gig. Then came the night that changed everything. I had stopped at the gym after work, picked up some groceries, and parked my Enterprise rental car. I trudged up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my body exhausted. Because I had been on the naval base that day, and because regulations strictly prohibited storing personal firearms on federal property, I wasn't carrying my concealed pistol. I was completely unarmed. I unlocked my front door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. Behind me, the heavy, frantic thud of boots echoed down the stairwell from the 4th floor. I spun around. 4 men wearing dark hoodies, ski masks, and heavy gloves were charging directly at my open door. I dropped the grocery bags. Glass shattered as jars of pasta sauce hit the floor. I grabbed the edge of the heavy wooden door and threw my weight against it, trying to slam it shut. A steel-toed boot wedged into the gap. A shoulder slammed into the wood, sending me stumbling backward into my own entryway. The next 14 seconds are permanently burned into my hard drive, backed up by the timestamp on the neighbor's newly installed security camera. I stumbled backward, my hand desperately reaching blindly into the narrow hall closet. My fingers closed around the cold, textured grip of a Sig Petwo 126 chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson. It was a terrible, irresponsible place to store a loaded firearm, but my younger self's paranoia saved my life. I brought the weapon up as the first man breached the threshold, a crowbar raised above his head. I didn't panic. The training took over, cold and mechanical. Center axis relock, both eyes open. I squeezed the trigger. The deafening roar of the .40 caliber filled the cramped hallway. I didn't shoot to wound. I didn't shoot to scare, body, head. The first attacker took 2 rounds to the chest and 1 to the bridge of his nose, his momentum carrying him forward as he collapsed into a heap of dead weight. The overpenetration of the rounds tore straight through him and struck the second man behind him in the collarbone. Before the second guy could even register the shock, I put a hollow point directly into his forehead. The third man froze, his eyes wide behind the holes of his ski mask, staring at the sudden geyser of blood painting my drywall. He caught 4 consecutive rounds dead center of his mass, his heart and lungs instantly shredded. He dropped like a stone. The 4th man didn't fight. He turned and bolted for the stairs. I tracked his movement through the doorway, firing the last 3 rounds in my magazine through the fading smoke. Silence fell over the hallway, save for the high-pitched ringing in my ears and the wet, gargling sound of a punctured lung. The smell of copper and burnt powder was suffocating. When the police arrived, they peeled the masks off the bodies. The first 3 men were dead on the scene. The 4th man, groaning in a puddle of his own blood on the stairwell landing, was Kelton. Of the 3 rounds I fired at his retreating form, the first grazed his hip. The second embedded deeply into his right glute. The third round was the jackpot. It struck him squarely in the lower spine, shattering the vertebrae and severing his spinal cord near the kidneys. The police didn't charge me. It was a textbook justified self-defense shooting against a violent home invasion. But Kelton, because his 3 accomplices died during the commission of a felony he orchestrated, the district attorney hit him with 3 counts of felony manslaughter. They tacked on conspiracy to commit murder, battery, and a reckless endangerment charge for forcing me to discharge a weapon in an occupied building. He was permanently paralyzed from the navel down. He would require a catheter and a colostomy bag for the rest of his miserable life. He was shipped off to a maximum security medical ward in the state penitentiary, never to breathe free air again. You'd think this is the part where Briani realizes the truth, apologizes, and we ride off into the sunset. But reality isn't a fairy tale. Less than 24 hours after the shooting, Briani called me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She called me a murderer. She accused me of baiting Kelton, of deliberately getting the police involved just to provoke him into coming over so I could execute him. She blocked my number, blocked my social media, transferred to a different retail location, and moved across town. I never saw her or Tamsin again. It took me a long time to heal. Taking 3 human lives in your own home, stepping over their brains to get to your kitchen, fundamentally alters your brain chemistry. I couldn't touch a firearm for over a year without my heart rate spiking into a panic attack. But time passed, 8 years to be exact. I built my cybersecurity firm from the ground up. I found a partner who is fiercely supportive, brilliant, and absolutely has my back. We spend our weekends out on the water, and we're talking about starting a family of our own. Life is genuinely peaceful, but the universe has a funny way of tying up loose ends. Just last week, an old Google alert I had set up 8 years ago suddenly triggered in my inbox. It was Kelton's full legal name, followed by the word obituary. I made a few discreet calls to some old contacts. It turns out that being a paralyzed, loud-mouthed, wannabe gangster in a state penitentiary is a terrible survival strategy. He spent years running his mouth, assuming his wheelchair made him immune to retaliation. He assumed wrong. Another inmate finally snapped, dragged Kelton out of his chair, and used the heavy metal frame to cave his skull in, finishing the job with a pair of prison-issue boots. The obituary, of course, painted him as a tragic, bright young soul who simply fell on hard times. It also mentioned he was survived by a daughter, a kid none of us, not even Briani, knew he had sired during his tweaking days. I pity the girl, but honestly it's a blessing she'll never have to meet him. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and sometimes it needs to be carried to the curb first. We all want to believe that taking the high road will eventually lead to a happy ending, but the truth is, the world doesn't reward passive endurance. Protecting your peace and your life sometimes requires drawing a hard line in the sand and refusing to back down when someone crosses it. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What's the craziest roommate or family situation you've ever had to survive? Stay safe, trust your training, and I'll see you in the next one.